Hello, it's Jason again with another talk about the de-spiritualization of our times. So, I had been talking about some of the factors that have led to to us becoming less and less spiritualized, less and less focused on our spirits, acknowledging the existence of the spirit and addressing our spirits. And mostly I looked at external things. These are the things that could cause us to become despiritualized without us knowing it, without us realizing it really. Okay? And a couple of the biggest ones. One is one that I think most people kind of see, whether they would use the word despiritualized or even mention a spirit. I mean, that part could be different, but a lot of people have noticed that with the increased use of the internet and more of our dealings are online and not in real life, most people have noticed that, of course, there's more feelings of isolation. People seem to treat each other worse and so forth. And this doesn't make sense because I don't think you can bring your spirit to your online persona. And when we read people's writings online, when we get into arguments on the internet, if you do that, hopefully you don't waste your time on that, or to various things, we don't see the full person in a sense. We only see a set of ideas. And we react to those ideas, and I don't think it's controversial to say that people tend to be a lot more rude online than in real life. You could say it's just because they're not afraid of getting punched in the nose, but part of it is also that it's easier to see the entity with whom you're arguing as not human. You're not seeing their humanness. You're just seeing ideas you don't like or stances you don't like and reacting. And of course, it's also true that the person you're dealing with online could be totally misrepresenting themselves. And it's getting to the point, of course, where they might not even be a person. The person you're dealing with could be AI or a bot of some kind, and that's probably going to be a thing that occurs more and more. And as we know, people will use AI to do some things that benefit mankind, and people use AI to do things to exploit others. That's just how it works, because we know that people are capable of both good and evil, and that the tools we make are generally not good or evil. They're just tools that we use. So the increased use of the internet and online, living a lot of our life online, even creating some might say we're even creating a separate persona. Our real life persona and our online persona might not match up very well because our spirit is not involved, and we don't hold back out of respect for other human beings, perhaps. And the other thing that I mentioned, the external thing that has definitely increased our lack of spirituality, is just science. And again, that's not a diss on science, it's just that science has done a very good job of addressing physical needs. So it's almost gotten to the point where, because science addresses the physical world very well, it studies the physical world, observes and understands the physical world, and creates solutions, or at least reactions, not always solutions, but reactions to the physical world. It's almost like we preferred that our problems were physical, because then there's more hope, in a sense, where because we know, oh, well, if the problems are physical, let's turn to science. Science will solve it. And we've gotten so used to it, it's kind of a knee-jerk reaction to turn to science. Let's do a study. Let's do a study, and we'll gather information, and we'll synthesize it, and we'll figure out a solution. That we're almost ignoring. We've almost totally ignored the idea that what if science can't answer the problem, because the problem isn't physical. And as we mentioned before, if all we are physical beings, then all of our problems are essentially physical problems, and science eventually would be able to solve all those problems, assuming that we exist long enough to perfect our science. But of course we may not. And of course, one of the reasons we may not is because our problems are not purely physical. We tend to have these moral problems that have been exposed in science fiction and in real life over and over that we tend to fight amongst ourselves and give into petty jealousies and lust and greed and so on and so forth, and us versus them, sectarianism and so forth, tribalism, I guess you would say. So, but because science has done a really good job of dealing with many things that are to making our lives physically better, that we live longer, we live with less pain, and for the most part, and we turn to science very quickly and studies very quickly to try to solve our problems. But as a result, we may not have given much thought to, well, what if our problems are actually spiritual? Then where do we turn? And it's trickier. It's not as obvious. So it might just be more convenient to turn to science and say, well, let's hope science can solve this one too. But as a result, we have focused less and less on the spiritual because we're finding more and more physical ways to deal with physical things, right? Okay. So, oh shoot. Yeah, so those are the two of the big external problems. But I also hinted that there are internal reasons, not problems, external reasons. Science is not a problem. External reasons that we may be becoming less spiritual. But there are also internal reasons to be less spiritual. In this case, we're culpable. We're deciding to be less spiritual. And there are two main divisions to this. One would be if we despiritualize others, we're in a sense dehumanizing them because, as we mentioned, if there's a spirit, clearly the spirit is part of what makes us human. All the things that separate humans from animals seems to be something that we can't quite put our finger on, but we can clearly intuit that we're very different from animals. We're not just the highest animal. We're kind of in a separate group. In our terminology, as I've mentioned before, it betrays that we believe that. Anyway, if I can, or if a person can see other humans as less than human, it makes it easier for us to mistreat them. We talked about this with the online thing. If you're dealing with people online, it is easier to see to not think of them as human because you're not seeing the person. You're just seeing ideas or images that might anger you, and so you just respond without thinking, hey, there's a person with a backstory, with a history, with experiences, with dreams, with so on, with a family, writing these things. So I should respond to a person and give them the due respect a human being should get. But it's easier, or I shouldn't say it's easier, but if we can forget about all that stuff, it's easier for us to treat people worse. And that's also true in real life. It doesn't have to be online. A lot of times we'll see people in traffic or people at the store and stuff, and we'll just see them as an object in our way. They're causing us to be late, or giving us stress, we think, or blah, blah, blah. And even just the phrase, you're in my way, kind of indicates that we believe that the path we're on is my way. So how dare you be in my way? And it indicates that at that moment, we're not really seeing the person as a human. We're just seeing them as a physical body that happens to be in our way, or is making our life more difficult. So if we dehumanize, if we despiritualize others, if we see others as less spiritual, it kind of allows us to treat them as objects. And they could be objects that are in our way, that we want out of our way, or they could be objects that we might be able to use to get to where we want to go. Right? I'm not your stepping stone. Remember that song? But we can use people like that, right? And people hate that, right? People say, oh man, I feel so used. And when we say that, basically we're saying, I wasn't treated like a human being. I was treated like a means to an end. But we shouldn't think of people as a means to an end. We think of each person as their own end, in the sense that we believe, unlike with other species, each person is important. And that's exactly why we have the Bill of Rights. I quoted the Constitution earlier, I think it's the Constitution, where it says all We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed with by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. We need that. We need a Bill of Rights. The reason we need a Bill of Rights is because if there's a democracy and there's no Bill of Rights, Plato's prediction that democracy could become mob rule would be true. It would come true. The majority could enslave the minority. Especially if all it took was a simple majority to pass any laws, the majority would just keep passing laws that benefited them, but hurt or oppressed the minorities. So this is why a Bill of Rights was put into the Constitution, because we have to ensure that there's individual rights. We can't just do what's best for the species or for the society, or what we think is best for society or think is best for the species, if we treat the individual badly. That can't be part of it. We have to treat each individual with the respect a human should have. Humans need to be treated as humans, and when we say that, it indicates that we think in our species the individual is important. So important that we have to set up a bunch of rules to protect their individual rights so that the majority doesn't oppress them. Unfortunately, we haven't followed this very well, but we know it's true. Whether we follow it or not is different. And there's another reason we might despiritualize ourselves. And that is, rather than despiritualizing other people, I could despiritualize myself on purpose. Now, why would I do that? Well, one of the big reasons I keep mentioning that I think we intuit that we have a spirit is because we have free will, or we intuit that we have free will, or we hope we have free will, I think. The idea that we are actually making decisions and our brain isn't just following the laws of physics and every thought and feeling we have was destined to happen because our brain was simply doing what the chemicals and whatever's going on at subatomic levels. I'm not sure what all's going on there, but I know that it happens because it happens. Everything's following laws of nature. But with the spirit, we can introduce the idea that there's a part of us that's not subjected to those laws, that can think freely, that can allow us to think freely and choose freely. However, there's kind of a new thing, I should say it's new, but it seems to be growing, and that's the idea of denying our free will in order to gain a certain type of freedom. It sounds contradictory, but I think you'll see as I explain this, if I can deny my free will in a certain area of my life, and I can just say, oh yeah, this part of my life, I don't choose it. I can't choose it. It's just who I am. Then that absolves me of criticism and of the hard work of self-discipline. I can just shrug my shoulders and say, well, it doesn't matter what anyone thinks or whether you think this or that. I can't choose it. It's just who I am. And of course, once you say you can't choose something, you can't criticize whether you're making a good choice or bad choice because there is no choice. That also means you don't have to discipline yourself, right? There are times in our lives when we think, here's where I am, but I'd rather be over here. But over here is tough. And we can decide, am I going to take the necessary steps to discipline myself and maybe surround myself with some people that will help me get from where I am to this other place where I'd rather be, maybe I wouldn't even rather be there, but I just know it's better, right? You can think of somebody like an addict. A lot of things are addictive, not just what we typically refer to as addictive. Many things are addictive, right? I mean, addictive basically means you do something that you keep doing something that you probably know isn't good for you, probably isn't the best choice, but you feel like you don't have a choice. And that'd be liberating, right? Would it be liberating to say, oh, I keep making this bad choice. Oh, you know what? It's not a choice. It's just who I am. And it's liberating because now you're not culpable. You don't have to discipline yourself. You don't have to try so hard. You can just embrace the real you. But the more we do this, the more we take parts of our life and say, well, this part I can't choose, and this part I can't choose, and this is just who I am over here, and blah, blah. The more we're removing our free will. And the more we remove our free will, the more we're cutting away, I think, at our spirit. The idea is we're making ourselves more and more and more about an unchangeable brain and less about a changeable spirit. We're saying, okay, So the whole idea of self-discipline or self-improvement is shrinking if we do that, because we're denying that. So that's the reason we might want to lessen our spirituality or shrink our spirituality. Is it shrinks our responsibility. It shrinks what can be chosen. Anything that can be chosen, whenever there's a free choice, that opens it up to the idea of, okay, if there's a choice, which choices are wise, which are foolish, which are selfish, which are selfless, which are good, which are bad, whatever adjectives you want to use to describe the choices. The fact is, once something is demonstrated as choosable, it's open for discussion as to what makes it a good choice or a bad choice, both internally in our own heads, but also from the people around us. So if we declare something to be unchoosable, it's just who I am, all that goes away. And it's like a big phew, But is that actually, does shrinking our free will and shrinking our spirit, is that actually for our benefit? Well, we might get into that later. But I just want to mention that there are a couple reasons that we might despiritualize. There's kind of two main categories. One is we're not trying to, we're just focused on the physical because we're living in a more and more physical world, in a world where science is really excelling at explaining the physical world. And so it's kind of like got our attention away from the spiritual, and we're dealing more and more with people online and not with real, I shouldn't say real people. They are real people, right? Well, like I said, maybe they're bots, or maybe they're second or third versions of somebody, and that's part of it, right? We don't know, so it makes it trickier. So maybe there's a troll, quote unquote. Anyway, and then also there's the internal side. Reasons we might want to either see others as less spiritual so we can treat them a certain way, or see ourselves as less spiritual so we can treat ourselves a certain way. Right? It's interesting that I think that when we see others as less spiritual, is so we can treat them harshly, and when we see ourselves as less spiritual, is so we can treat ourselves kindly, or like, oh shoot, you're taking responsibility off your shoulders. Relax, rest. Love yourself. Oh, but I'll treat them as less spiritual because it allows me to use them the way I want to use them. Yeah. Anyway, and I mentioned pornography. Pornography is such a perfect example of how despiritualizing another person allows us to use them. If you take away someone's heart, their backstory, their dreams, their ideas, their humanity, and just see them as a body, bouncing around, then it's easier to think thoughts and use them basically in your own story as a pawn in a story that satisfies you, rather than seeing them as a human being who has real relationships with real people and a real heart and real fears, real dreams, and all those sorts of things. If we can just strip that all away, it's so much easier to just treat them like a piece of meat, right? So next time, I'm going to get into the idea of morality, I think, because one of the foundational ideas of this of having the spirit, I think, or one of the foundations that having the spirit sets, like I said, if it does give us free will, then suddenly, I shouldn't say suddenly, but naturally, because there's free will at the foundation of who we are, that means we can choose freely, and so our choices have to be examined, because it only makes sense that choices are not all equal. Some choices are better than others. And I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. I think everybody would say that. I think every parent, their goal is for their children to make wise choices rather than foolish choices. I think even a doctor, telling their patient to make better choices about what they eat or about how they spend their time and so on. I mean, that's not controversial, I don't think. So we'll look into that a little bit, about how spirituality and morality is involved in all this. Okay, Well, I'll see you next time.